Oi, Jean, consegui conectar pelo link.
Oi. Tá conseguindo?
I think now we have a connection.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Good.
Jean, você vai se apresentar, é isso?
Eu vou fazer. Pode falar para ele que eu vou fazer uma apresentação e ele já pode começar ao final.
Dr. Dattesh, Jean,
Yes.
we will start speaking now, okay?
Okay.
And a few minutes ago, you can start.
Okay.
Okay, Jean?
Bom dia, estudantes. Nesse dia 14 de agosto, a gente vai dar início à 7ª edição da Semana Acadêmica de Relações Internacionais. A semana Acadêmica representa um momento único no curso de bacharelado em Relações Internacionais da UFPEL, pois ela permite a organização de eventos científicos com o protagonismo discente, mediante a orientação e colaboração de docentes do curso, além da discussão de temas científicos da área de RI, são discutidos eixos profissionalizantes vinculados à formação acadêmica dos docentes do curso. Este ano, a SARI é mais do que especial, pois foi pensada em uma estrutura de festival para que todos possam aproveitar a SARI e fazer dessa semana acadêmica um evento inesquecível. Sintam-se à vontade sempre para questionar, participar, interagir e realizar trocas. O evento foi pensado para cada um de vocês. O tema da SARI desse ano, como já é divulgado, é Nossas Perspectivas da Ordem Internacional Contemporânea. Por conta disso, nada mais justo do que iniciar essa SARI falando sobre um dos principais atores globais da atualidade, a Índia. Para isso, a SARI tem o orgulho de receber sua primeira palestra internacional, que será ministrada pelo professor Dattesh, para diretamente de Goa University, na cidade de Bangi, no estado de Goa. Muito obrigado, professor, e desculpa os transtornos. E vamos começar a palestra.
Okay, Dr. Dattesh, you can start now. We have some problems, but now we can start. Thank you for your presence here.
Sure. Thank you very much. At the outset, I would like to thank Lucas, who got in touch with me, and for inviting me to speak in this International Relations Week of your prestigious university. I will be speaking to you today about Rising India and how a rising India impacts global governance and the international system. So let's first understand India. What exactly is India? We are a country of 75, 76 years of independence. But what makes India extremely important is that it is a civilization of 5,000 years. It's an ancient civilization that has remained timeless, and its influence has been in many parts of the world for a long time. So many people do understand India not so much from the point of view of power, but they see India more from the point of view of civilizational existence. Having said that, we must also understand why we should talk about a rising India. Everyone talks about the United States and how the United States is declining. People also talk about the rise and the strong rise of China. And many people believe that the world will be driven by US China competition. While that is true, the fact remains that many countries in the world who are not as strong as China and the United States right now, and I put Brazil in that category, Brazil, India, many other countries, they want to have a third option. And that third option is India, which can lead that third option, which is against China and against the United States. Today, as we speak, India is the fifth largest economy in the world. In 5 years' time, it will become the third largest economy in the world, ahead of Japan. And in 20 years' time, 25 years' time, it will be a 20 to $25 trillion economy. That will clearly mean that this is the century. Everyone says this is the century of China and India. In fact, a famous economist recently said the first 2 decades of this century belong to China. The next 2 decades of this century will probably belong to India. Right now, India is the fastest growing economy in the world amongst the developed economies. It is also a very young country. 65% of India, and India has the largest population in the world, 1.4 billion people. 65% of India is below the age of 35. So India is a very young country. The average age of India is 27. And many studies say that this will continue for the next 50, 60, 70 years. So as the world is getting older, with too many aging people, India is getting young and remaining young. So that is a big advantage for India, even over China, which is now beginning to get old. So many people say that China's growth rate now is going to slow down. It is not going to grow at the rate at which it was growing some years ago, when it was growing for 30 years at 10%, 11% economic growth per year. Now it will grow at something like 4, 4.5, 5%. And because India is a young country with a lot of potential to grow, India can grow at 7, 8, even 9% if the conditions are right. So this is about India, the broad understanding of India. But before we get into discussing the strategic aspects of rising India, let's understand what India stands for in the world. The most unique aspect of India is its democracy. It has been a democracy now for the last 75, 76 years. It is currently the chair of the G20. And last year, when Prime Minister Modi received the chairmanship from Indonesia on the 30th of November, he said, "Welcome to the mother of all democracies." Because India has been a democracy even before it became independent. India's culture, India's civilization has always stood for democracy. And when we say democracy, what does democracy mean? Democracy does not just mean elections. Democracy does not mean just political parties. Democracy means debate. Democracy means discussion. In fact, they famously say about India that an Indian is an argumentative person. So every Indian likes to make arguments. Every Indian likes to say no to the other person. And that is how India has developed its democracy of discussion, of debate, of deliberation, finding consensus. So when India is a democracy at home, India also believes in democracy abroad. And that is why one of the foundational pillars of this rising India is a belief in the democracy of the world. So India is always there to promote democracies in the world. However, there is a big difference. We don't believe in promoting democracies by force. We don't do it the American way of regime change. So India does not go into any country and throw out a government and say we will put a democratic government like how the Americans have done in the past. We believe that democracy must be encouraged from the outside, but the people of the country must make their own decision. So this is the first point, that we believe in democracy at all times. India also believes in multilateralism. We don't believe in unilateralism. There was a foreign minister of the United States, Secretary of State, in the 1990s called Madeleine Albright. She once famously said, unilateralism where we must, multilateralism where we can, which means where we need to get our own interest, we will not care for the world opinion. We will go and do what we think is right. India does not believe in this approach. India's approach is that we believe in multilateralism. The best way to solve the global problems is by countries coming together and discussing and finding a solution, and not in saying it's my way or the highway. So India believes in universal solutions. Universal means bringing all countries together. In fact, right now we have a situation where the United States says in the world that we are exceptional. There is something exceptional about the United States. China says something very similar. China says there is a China way of doing things in the world, and there is an American way of doing things in the world. But what India says, and that's what makes India different, is India doesn't say I am exceptional. India says I am universal. That means I want to work with China, I want to work with United States, I want to work with Brazil, I want to work with France, I want to work with the smallest countries. And that is the way to find global solutions for global problems. And I will give you some examples now of the last few years, how India has been promoting global solutions to global problems. The first one is in 2016. India and France came together, and we said that we will establish the International Solar Alliance. Now, we all understand what solar energy is all about. It is about the energy from the sun. There are more than 120 countries in the world which have got a lot of sunlight, and they have the ability to capture the sunlight and to make the use of sunlight through solar power. Brazil is also on this path. Brazil has also joined India on the path of this solar energy capture. But it's not enough to only use solar power for yourself. It is also important to provide the solar power energy to small countries, developing countries, poor countries who don't have energy, they don't have electricity, they don't have light, and that keeps them backward. So India said that even though we are dealing with the Paris climate change agreement, which we have signed, we are also at the same time promoting solar power through this treaty called the International Solar Alliance. And today there are more than 120 countries that have joined this International Solar Alliance, including Brazil, and many other countries in Latin America have also joined. About 8 countries have joined from Latin America. And the whole idea is to make this a global success. This is one example. In 2018, India asked the United States to join India in what is called as disaster resilient infrastructure. Now, let me explain. Whenever a tsunami or a natural disaster hits small countries, like for example, you have cyclones in the Caribbean, you have tsunamis in many parts of the world, you have storms. they destroy the infrastructure in poor countries, and poor countries do not have the money to rebuild this infrastructure. Now, who will help them? Obviously, somebody has to come forward and create this concept called disaster resilient infrastructure. For example, when there is an earthquake, houses collapse. But Japan is a country that has got technology which does not allow houses to collapse like a pack of cards. It is called earthquake resistant housing. Now, this is technology which needs to be taken to the poorest and the smallest countries in the world, the island states, the small countries, the poorer section of society, for whom this is a lifeline. And so India has mastered this disaster resilient infrastructure initiative. Similarly, India believes in the health of the oceans. So in 2019, India proposed Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. This is a very interesting initiative because when we look at our oceans, what do we think of? We think of using the oceans for our benefit. So for shipping, for fishing, for oil exploration, and many other activities. But just as we use the oceans, like we think about our health, we take care of our own health, we must also think about the health of the oceans. Today, you know that the world, or the Greenpeace in the world has made it very clear that by 2050, given the amount of pollution in the waters, by 2050, there will be more garbage than fish in our waters. Now, India has made it very clear that it wants to stand for a very different world. And that's why it is talking about the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which talks about bringing back the health of the oceans, investing in the health of the oceans, making the oceans better. Because only when the ocean is better, the maritime waters are better, then our civilians and our communities that live on these waters, they can survive, they can get incomes, and they can do better. So this idea of health of the oceans is something unique. The United States or China don't talk about this, but India brings a very unique perspective to international affairs. If you see India, India is the most acceptable country in the world. So if you look at China and the United States, they don't agree on many issues. And because they don't agree on many issues, the world faces tremendous problems. Often you are made to choose between China and the United States. But the problem is with India, it's very different. Every major power in the world wants to engage India. The United States considers India as one of its strongest partners globally. Russia and India have been friends for a long time, and that friendship continues with President Putin and Prime Minister Modi. India and Brazil have had a dynamic relationship for a long time. This year, India is the chair of the G20, and at the end of September, we will be passing on this gavel to your president because Brazil will be the next president of the G20. And India and Brazil have been working together for many years. Similarly, if you look at European countries, they all look for relationship with India. If you look at Southeast Asian countries, Japan, Korea, Australia, every country seems to want to engage with India. And that is because India, because of its approach to international relations, which is very consensual, very, very non-confrontational, makes India extremely acceptable as a country and extremely legitimate. If you look at the G7 is the group of 7 rich industrialized countries: United States, Canada, Japan, Germany, UK, France, and Italy. The G7 has now become informally like the G7 plus, and they call 3 countries permanently for G7 meetings, although they are not in the G7. India is one of the permanent invitees to the G7. This is a recognition of India's. China is not part of G7, but India is an invitee to the G7. As I told you, India is the president of the G20. And when the G20 was established in 2008, India and the United States were the founding members of the G20 at the summit level. India is also friendly with both Russia and China. There is a group called RIC, Russia, India, China. It's a troika, three countries together. India works with Russia and China on multiple issues where it does not agree with the United States. India works on something called as the G4. The G4 is four countries: India, Brazil, Japan, and Germany. All these four countries want a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. And they believe that they are the most qualified to be the permanent members of a reformed Security Council. So India is part of the G4 as well. So if you see this, and India, most of all, is also part of BRICS. Again, Brazil is there, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And BRICS is an emerging economies grouping. So it tells you that whichever grouping you have in the world, everyone seems to want India. And that is India's strength. India is a very, very acceptable country. I would also go so forward as to say, what makes India unique is not just its ancient civilization, but India stands for moral issues. India has moral strength. When India speaks, they speak a language of peace. In fact, India is a country that has never invaded anybody else's country, never taken anybody else's territory. And India believes that peace is the way forward. So always, in fact, last year, Prime Minister Modi, he met with President Putin, and he told President Putin, because India and Russia are very close friends for 50 years. Russia and India have a special relationship at people to people level, government to government level, business to business level. But Prime Minister Modi told President Putin in front of the media, he said, President Putin, you are my friend, but let me tell you one thing. This is not the era for war. This is not the time of war. And Putin was kind of taken aback a little bit, but he did not say anything. On the contrary, he said, I accept this, Prime Minister Modi. I also accept that we have to bring an end to the war. And this statement, this is not a time for war. This became the statement in the G20 resolution, which was adopted at the last G20 meeting in Indonesia, in Bali, in November 2022. So it tells you that when India makes a moral position, it's a very strong position. India has always been a supporter of the United Nations. In fact, India was one of the founder members of the United Nations, even though the United Nations was created before the independence of India. We were British India at that time. But even as British India, we joined the United Nations. And the point is, we are the providers of humanitarian assistance in a big way in the United Nations. And India supplies peacekeepers. In fact, Brazil also does peacekeeping now. But at that time, India, and even today, India provides United Nations peacekeepers. And they go to all the dangerous hotspots in the world to bring peace. So this is India's commitment to the United Nations. But India firmly believes that the time for UN reform has come. The United Nations today is not like the world today. The United Nations is like the world of 1945. It is the world of post-World War II. It seems to have those countries in the prominent position who are no longer as influential, as powerful as they used to be 75 years ago. I mean, if you don't have India, if you don't have Japan, if you don't have Germany, if you don't have Brazil, and many other countries, you cannot say that the UN Security Council is, kind of representative of the world affairs. So India has been pushing very hard that there must be a voice for developing countries, not just for the rich countries and the developed countries. Also, India stands for something called as the Global South. Now, what is Global South? The Global South is all these countries in Latin America, in Africa, in South Asia, the small island states in the Caribbean, off the coast of Africa, in the South Pacific, the poorer countries, the developing countries, the emerging countries. These are called the Global South. India has traditionally always stood for the Global South. So if you go and read, you will realize that India, since the 1950s and the 1960s, was always seen as a country that stood for the lesser countries and always negotiated with the richer countries for better terms for the smaller countries. So today also India stands for the global south, and the global south, which is the poorer countries, they look up to India as a voice for them at the high table. In fact, Prime Minister Modi has made a call to the other leaders of the G20, and he has said, just like you have European Union in the G20, we should have African Union in the G20. Now, Africa is a very important continent, 54 countries, 1.2 billion people, a lot of resources, very young continent like India, very young people, lot of scope for infrastructure investment. And many say that Africa will be the engine of growth along with India and China and Brazil and a few other countries in this century. So Prime Minister Modi has called for African Union to be made part of G20 like the European Union. If European Union is rich man's club, then African Union is the poor man's club, which also should be there to discuss global issues. India's biggest strength is India's individuals, India's population. In fact, there was a time when people used to make fun of India in the olden times. They used to, they used to ridicule India's population, and they used to say India is a country of naked people, of snake charmers and elephants. Well, we have snake charmers, we have elephants, we also have, a decent number of naked people also. But India today is not known for that. India is known for its spiritualism. India is known for its human innovation. Today, when you talk about India, there are two words that most people know about India, which is IT. And IT means computers, information technology. Anywhere in the world you go and see Indians, I mean, including in Brazil, there are many Indians who live in United States and Mexico. You will find them highly educated. You will find them in the information technology sector, in the knowledge sector. Just to give you one example, almost 40% of NASA, which is America's space agency, 40% of NASA scientists are of Indian origin. They are Indians who migrated to United States for education, and then they settled down in United States. In fact, if you look at India's diaspora are Indians who live abroad. 40 million people are Indians who live abroad in more than 100 countries. And there is probably no country in the world that ever says, oh, we don't want these Indians are bad, throw them out. Okay, they are problem people. No, in every country where Indians go and live, they become part of that country. They live in harmony, they live in love and peace and affection. And so Indians are liked. India is liked because of Indian people. So India welcomes people from all over the world, and India also goes to different parts of the world and establish themselves. So the point is, India's biggest strength is India's education, India's knowledge power. And today, when you see an Indian in some Western country, invariably that Indian will be doing a PhD, or he will be a doctor, he will be an engineer, he will be a scientist, he will be in some profession. And that is what the world now acknowledges, that India has this unique power to provide solutions for the world. So what India has done, a rising India has done, is to provide solutions which are very affordable to people. For example, when India sends a satellite into outer space, now we know that satellites cost a lot of money. It is a very expensive business. And not many countries in the world have a space program because it costs millions and millions and billions of dollars. But India has the reputation to send satellites into outer space, which are sometimes even cheaper than probably what you will spend on, let's say, building, let's say, one railway network. It's that cheap. And that is why today, even Brazil, in fact, in the last few years has established a very strong relationship with India in the field of space technology. And India and Brazil want to work together. In fact, India and the United States, India and Europe, India and Russia. There are many countries that work with India in the space field. Just to give you one interesting example, Israel and Iran are enemies of each other. We all know that. But interestingly, a few years ago, India launched a satellite for both Israel and Iran in outer space. So even though those two countries are enemies of each other, but they come to India and ask India to launch satellites. That's one. Second, India is known for healthcare. In fact, the famous statement about India is the pharmacy of the world. For the last 40 years, India has been providing vaccines to the world on many issues, like hepatitis. There are many people in China who, in fact, keep asking people in India, can you bring hepatitis injections for us? Of course, you can't take it like that because it is a banned thing. But the point is, India provides vaccines to the whole world for the last 40 years, since 1980. And this time in the pandemic also, India was able to provide vaccines to more than 100 countries in the world. In fact, many small countries who don't, and I'm going to give you an example now of a Latin American country so you understand it better, how India stands for moral uprightness. We all know Paraguay. So Paraguay asked China, can you give us some vaccines? About 50,000 vaccines Paraguay wanted. So China told them, okay, we can give you the vaccines. And this is a real story. But for that, you have to do something. So Paraguay said what? They said you have to withdraw your recognition for Taiwan, because Paraguay as a country recognizes Taiwan and not mainland China. In fact, right now, the Taiwanese vice president is heading to Paraguay for the presidential inauguration. So Paraguay said, no, we can't do this. You can't blackmail us. We are asking you for vaccines because we are in trouble. But China said, we will provide you vaccines, but you must first do this, withdraw the support to Taiwan. Paraguay's foreign minister called up Taiwan's foreign minister and asked for help. Taiwan said, we don't have vaccines, but we can ask India. So they asked India. Within 24 hours, Prime Minister Modi sent on an Indian Air Force plane, the Air India plane, 50,000 vaccine doses to Paraguay. No requirement of anything. We just sent it to them because it was a humanitarian necessity. And Paraguay was so happy. So after that, we established the Embassy of India now in Asuncion. And in fact, Paraguay was extremely happy. So this is how India behaves in the world. There is a certain moral quality to how India operates. So healthcare is a very big issue where India is like a potential world leader. Thirdly, India always finds cheap solutions to many problems. For example, in our country, and I will say this because this is a good connection with Brazil. In 2005, when President Lula was then president, Indian government sent one team to study Bolsa Familia because they wanted to see how Bolsa Familia was working. And as somebody like me who works on Latin American affairs, they came, they studied, and they went back to India and they implemented a scheme which was like almost the same like what Brazil was doing, because they were quite impressed by the way in which the benefits came from Bolsa Familia. But India did not stop at that. India took it much further. So today, if you see India, the number of people who do payments through internet and not through money, not through cash, it is an absolute revolution. I can give you a figure from last month. 10 billion, not million, 10 billion transactions in 1 month. India's population is 1.4 billion, but 10 billion transactions in 30 days in India. Because if you come to India now and you will see even the person on the street, some taxi driver, rickshaw driver, anybody on the street, he will say, you pay me through Google Pay. Don't give me cash. So Indians are not using cash now. Indians are doing cashless transactions. And this is so amazing a revolution that many countries in the world, including countries, in Argentina, etc., they have asked India, we would like to learn more about how you were able to successfully do this kind of cashless transactions. Second, India also provides technology solution in the form of, during the pandemic, we came up with an app. The app is to know your vaccination status. So it is called Cowin app, COWIN, Cowin app. This app has been so good. I will tell you a real story. India's foreign minister is a guy called Dr. Jaishankar. Dr. Jaishankar's son, he lives in the United States. So Dr. Jaishankar had gone to meet his son as part of a visit to United States. So they went to a restaurant in America. And when they arrived at the restaurant, Jaishankar, they asked him, what is your vaccine status? So Jaishankar took out his mobile phone and showed the app and showed him that, look, this is my status. It was showing that he had taken the 2 doses, when he took it, where he took it, his life status, everything was shown. Whereas Jaishankar's son, who was living in the United States, he removed a piece of paper and showed physical copy that, look, I am vaccinated. So this is the interesting thing. United States is a rich country. United States is a powerful country. United States has so many technologies in the world. But India here proves that in many cases, India can contribute technological solutions. Many people don't realize when we do our elections, we are 1.4 billion people, but about 900 million people are eligible to vote in an Indian election. Now, 900 million is almost 4 times the population of Brazil. Almost. 900 million people can vote, and we count the votes on one day through electronic voting machines. Within 8 to 10 hours, we know the result of 900 million voters. That is 2.5 times the population of the United States. So, and all of this is done through machines. It is extremely good, and that is why India again is recognized as a technological power. In fact, India has got a body to conduct elections in a free and fair manner, and that is called the Election Commission. It is such a powerful body that when the Election Commission of India says these are the rules of the election, everybody has to follow the rules. There is no question of any not following of the rules. It can't be like Donald Trump did in the United States, where he told the American Election Commission, I don't care a damn, I will not come for the presidential debate. In India, if you don't follow the Election Commission and what the Election Commission says, you will be put out of the election. And it is so free and fair that the United Nations made an agreement with the Election Commission of India for the last 20 years in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in East Timor, in Syria, and many other parts of Africa. Wherever elections are, the Election Commission of India, they send their observers, they send their people to help in the conduct of elections. So this again is a great respect for India that, look, we believe in your democracy. We believe on how good you are. And in fact, recently, India has signed an agreement with 2 countries in Latin America, one with Panama, one with Peru. In both those countries, the Election Commission has signed agreement with the Indian Election Commission to learn how to do free and fair elections, because there are Latin American countries with democracies. They want to be electoral democracies. So India is offering solutions to many poor countries today. And I'll give you one example. When we made a presentation in the United Nations on the Cowin app, the vaccination app, 150 countries came for that meeting. 143 countries out of 93 countries of the United Nations, they came for that meeting. They wanted to study what India is offering. They wanted to see how this can come to the country. So it's very interesting that when America and China give economic solutions, in America it is about, in America it's about profit. In America it's about corporates, because America always tells you we can't give technology in a cheap way because we spend billions of dollars in research and development, and we don't spend it, our big business spends it. So we cannot give you things in a cheap. But same with China. With China, although they will give you cheap, the problem is the Communist Party will decide who can give you what. A private man in China cannot give you something without the permission of the Chinese government. But in India, you get the best of both. In India, an Indian is free to provide anything that he wants to provide to anybody in the world. He doesn't have to ask the Prime Minister of India, for one. And number two, India, because technology is in the hands of the government, government makes technology, not the private sector, you don't have big business dominating like you do in the United States of America. So this is a very important point, and this is how India influences also the global economy and global society. Also important to understand that India stands for non-alignment, which is we are not aligned to any big power. We work with every power based on the interests and based on the issues we have. So, for example, on the issue of climate change, we work with Brazil, we work with Argentina, we work with South Africa, we work with China against the United States because United States is not making the necessary compromises when it comes to giving technology transfer on climate change, giving money on climate change to developing countries. Similarly, on the issue of agriculture, the WTO, there is something called the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization has been in a bit of a stalemate for almost 20 years now. The issue is agricultural subsidy. Now, the Americans give huge agricultural subsidies to their farmers, and that makes agriculture cheaper compared to other agricultural producers in the world. So India, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, African countries, including European countries and China, they have come together and they have said to America, this cannot continue. If you want free trade, it has to be fair trade. It can't only be free trade because America wants it. It has to be fair trade. And I will tell you that this is the same thing that Brazil stood for in the 1990s when Brazil said no to America, Summit of the Americas in Miami, because Brazil stood up and said, we need a Latin American trade organization and not an American driven trade organization for Latin America. So Latin American countries should be able to decide their own ways of doing business. So as I said, India stands for 5 principles. There are 5 principles that India stands for. The first is in international relations I'm talking about. The first is dialogue. India stands for dialogue. And all the time, India will say, no war, we want peace, we want negotiations, we want dialogue. So whether it is Iran, whether it is North Korea, whether it is Syria, whether it is Iraq, or whether it is, for example, Ukraine, India always stands for dialogue and they prefer dialogue. Second, India stands for cooperation. In fact, we make that a mantra. So we always stand for cooperative solutions, not for exclusive solutions. India likes to share with other countries its own experience. We are not telling other countries what to do. We are just saying, we have done this well. If you want to learn from us, we are happy. We can give you this. We can provide you this solution because the world will become better. And I will give you one example. In 2016, India hosted the India-Africa Summit. We do a summit every 4-5 years with Africa, whole of African countries. When Prime Minister Modi hosted African leaders, he asked them, he said, you tell me what you want. I will not tell you what I will give you. You ask from me. The African countries told him, we will not ask about roads and bridges and all these things because China makes a lot of that very well. What we will ask you is please give us the software. Please give us the optical fiber cable. For our computers, for our internet, we believe in India because India has got the integrity, India has got the honesty. Like Indian companies are not controlled by any political party. India's IT companies are very free. In fact, they operate in Latin America as well. There's a company called Infosys. There's a company called Tata Consultancy Services. There's a company called Wipro. These are the three big Indian companies. They're not controlled by any political party in India. They're very, very free. It's not like Huawei. I mean, Huawei because Huawei is world renowned. It's a great company, but there are a lot of allegations that maybe the Huawei company has got links to Chinese military. And even Brazil is not very comfortable with allowing Huawei into 5G. Now, that problem is not there with Indian companies. So Indian companies don't have any military links or don't have any political links. They are free enterprise. So that's the second one. The third principle after cooperation is India stands for security. And when India says security, it is not only India's security, it is everyone's security. So we stand for, that's why we believe the United Nations is the best way to bring global security and not American driven security or Chinese driven security or Russian driven security or even French driven security. We believe in the role of international organizations. The fourth is we believe in prosperity, not just growth. For example, all countries can grow. Like Brazil was growing very, very, well a few years ago because Brazil was selling its commodities and, they were making the most of the commodity boom. But we know with growth, what goes up comes down. And so sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. But what will make you a good country, make you a developed country, is if you work for prosperity and not only for growth. So India stands for prosperity more than growth. So the focus is on quality of life, improving your per capita income, improving your agricultural scenario, improving your industrial manufacturing, improving the infrastructure of the country. And that is how India wants to provide this security to other countries as well. And the fifth point is India's culture and tradition. And I would like to speak a little bit about this. In 2014, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he made a speech at the UN General Assembly in the month of September. And he said, if you want to deal with the global health, don't think only about medicine, think about yoga. Now, yoga is very popular, and it's very popular even in Latin America. In fact, highly popular in Latin America. So he said yoga is important because yoga gives you body, mind, and soul therapy. It's comprehensive therapy because it does not just work on the body, it also works on your mind, but it also makes your soul very calm. And so there are so many people in the world who make use of yoga. Now, when he said this, he said, let us have one day in the world as an International Day of Yoga. And that day was established by the United Nations as the 21st of June. So I'm sure you'll be aware that every year on the 21st of June, in the whole world, people do yoga. And this is India's biggest gift to the world because yoga originated in India, and you have people even from Latin America who come to India in search for understanding the depth of yoga. Similarly, India has got ancient medicine, which is called Ayurveda. It is extremely popular in India. It is extremely popular in many countries of the world, but it is a rising science. And so India now, in fact, again, there is a big market for Ayurveda products in Latin America, in Africa, and many other parts of the world. Now, the good thing about this medicine is it is not habit forming. So like the normal paracetamol or normal, allopathic medicine you take, you become habituated to it. With Ayurvedic medicine, there is no habituation, and more importantly, there is no side effect. So you're not working just on health, you're working on the concept of wellness. And wellness over health is again what a rising India talks about. I will just mention 4 or 5 more points and then I will stop. India has come up with a doctrine which is called SAGAR, SAGAR. The full form of SAGAR is security and growth for all in the region. India's maritime strategy is about consensus. It is not about trying to keep resources for yourself. We know in the world there is a place called South China Sea, where there is a dispute between China and other countries in the South China Sea. Because China says 90% of the South China Sea is belonging to China. They have historical right over it. Now, and if you ask them why, they say, look, it is called South China Sea. Now, if South China Sea belongs to China because there's the name China, does the Indian Ocean belong to India because there is a name Indian? No. India does not believe that the words determine what the maritime boundaries are. There is international law. There is a rule of law. And the rule of law is something that India abides by. So India says all countries must follow the rule of law when it comes to maritime engagement. And I'm taking this point because Brazil is also a maritime country. You have found oil and gas reserves, offshore oil and gas reserves. So India and Brazil have very similar, attitudes. So we have a kind of a military exercise. We do maritime exercise every year. It is called IBSA, IBSA, India, Brazil, South Africa. These three countries do maritime exercises every year, and India's focus is on maritime well-being. As I said before, India is not anti any country. So we are not anti-China, we are not anti-America, we are not anti-Russia. We believe that when you are anti something, you will not be able to create a positive solution. It's only when you are positive orientation, you are for something, that is where you can actually bring consensus, that is where you can bring collaboration. And so India focuses on this whole notion of working positively for things as opposed to working negatively. And from environment to technology to health, India focuses on trying to bring countries together. I will give you one example. India right now is the president of the G20. So during the discussions, during the G20 discussions, India brought up the issue of One Health. Now, One Health means don't focus on only the health of the human beings. Also focus on the health of the animals and the plants, because the WHO has said, the World Health Organization has said, that in the future, the viruses which will come in the future will continue to be zoonotic, which is where there is an interaction between human beings and animals. So if you want to really protect yourself from further pandemics, then you have to work not only on human health, you also have to work on animal health, you also have to work on plant health. So India has come up with this concept, which is a civilizational concept for India. For thousands of years, India has spoken about One Health, because India says, whether it's human beings or animals or plants, we are all living beings. We are part of one cosmos. We are part of one universe. We are part of one creation. And unless we live in harmony with nature, you will not be able to find these solutions. In fact, I will tell you this, that when in 2018, when Argentina hosted the G20 in Buenos Aires, Prime Minister Modi was met with by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. And Antonio Guterres complimented Prime Minister Modi, and he said that you have done real leadership on the environment issue. You are really doing a lot on the environment. So Prime Minister Modi very politely, very humbly told him, thank you very much, sir, but what I'm doing is what we have learned from our civilization. Our civilizational lessons are something that give us this inner strength. Now, China also has an ancient civilization. China is also a great country. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party may have different opinions, but when you have a civilizational background, you can learn from your civilization, you can learn from lessons. The last point with which I will be happy to stop and maybe take some questions, if you have them, is India has a huge ability to stand up for principles. And one of the principles India has stood up for is that the poorest countries, they should not be put in debt. This is something that even Brazil has spoken out. And what India has said is the poorest countries must be given finance, but it should be given in a way that they can handle. And that is why India has constantly raised the issue of reforms of the international financial institutions, the World Bank and the IMF. These were two institutions created after World War II by the United States and Europe to run the international community. But we know there is something called as a BRICS Bank, which in fact, Dilma Rousseff right now, your former president, is actually right now the president of the BRICS Bank, the new development bank. Now, the reason we felt the need for these kind of banks is because the IMF and the World Bank have not done their duty. And so we said that unless you make the world more democratic, unless you give power to the developing countries, unless you give a voice to the poor countries, unless you work for the poor sections of society and bring them up, you will never get peace, stability, security, or for that matter, sustainable development. I'll be happy to stop here. And if there are any questions, I will be happy to take the questions. Thank you very much once again for inviting me to this particular forum.
Thank you, Professor.
We learned a lot about India. Now we have some questions, okay?
Sure. How to control the swinging state of the genders. Okay, so this is a very nice question. Yeah, okay. India has often been called as a swing state because India doesn't have the power that China and the United States has. India is a middle power. India is a rising power. And they always say when you are a rising power, you have to not fight with other countries, but you have to pragmatically cooperate with other countries and rise. Because if you are supporting one country against the other, if you are pro-US or pro-China, then you will suffer in the world because you will be hit against through retaliatory action. So when India has been a swing state, India has tried to use this swing state situation to its advantage. That's why I said when I was speaking that one of the things India stands for is India stands for neither an American-led world, nor does India stand for a Chinese-led world. India stands for a democratic, multilateral world, because we believe that the world is not about China and the United States, which we normally feel it is. Actually, the world is not unipolar. The world is not bipolar. The world is becoming increasingly multipolar. There are many poles in the world. Brazil is a pole in Latin America. Maybe Mexico feels even they are a pole in Latin America. You have Saudi Arabia that feels they are a regional power. There are many regional powers. Egypt is a regional power. Nigeria is a regional power. Japan, South Korea, Australia, Singapore, Vietnam, they are regional powers. So in a world of regional powers, what you have to be is you have to be a swing state. You have to work with different countries based on different issues, based on different interests. But at the end of the day, you must not compromise your national interest. So our current foreign minister, Dr. Jai Shankar, he wrote a book some years ago. It's a very famous book right now. It's called The India Way. And it basically talks about, in fact, it's a very interesting book because it draws on India's civilizational experience. It draws on India's experience from India's epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which are two of India's most important epics. And he talks about that and he explains how India's foreign policy is all about. And he uses a very interesting word, and it's quotes, in quotes. He says we have gone from being non-aligned to forever aligned, which means India does not matter. India will align with different countries depending on the situation, depending on the context, because what matters to India is India's national interest. Now, I'll give you one example. In the current Ukraine-Russia situation, the whole world was telling India, you should put sanctions on Russia, you should do this and that. India asked a question, how will sanctions stop this war? Please tell us. I mean, sanctions have been put by Europe, sanctions have been put by United States. Has it stopped President Putin from doing the war? No, it has not. On the contrary, two things have happened. One, it has allowed Putin to play around the sanctions and to be able to sell his oil on the black market. Number one, two countries. Two, as a result of the global oil prices going up because of sanctions, it is hurting whom? It is not hurting the United States, because the United States is an oil producer. It is not hurting the Arab countries because they are oil producers. It is hurting the rising emerging economies, because rising emerging economies are dependent on oil. So who has suffered the most from sanctions? Africa is suffering because food prices have gone up. Who is suffering? Latin American countries are suffering. You know, if you see the situation in Argentina, it's a very bad situation. Inflation is 100%. So the countries who are suffering are because of Western sanctions. But what India did? India said in its own national interest, it needs to get cheap oil. So it continued to buy oil from Russia. But in the United Nations, whenever the issues have been very important, India has not minded to go against Russia or even to abstain from a resolution on Russia. We have made it very clear to Russia, we don't subscribe to your war, but we, in our national interest, need to ensure that our economy remains stable. And that is why we have basically been buying the oil. And by the way, the Americans have been so selective on sanctions. The Americans have put sanctions on those commodities which they don't import from Russia. But for example, they import coal from Russia. They import fertilizer from Russia. There are no sanctions on coal and fertilizer. So that tells you how Western countries play a very selective game on sanctions. And that is what we are calling out. The second question that was asked there was about responsibility to protect and the issue of sovereignty. Now, this is also a very interesting question, because India has always stood for non-intervention in the internal affairs of countries. We don't believe that we should go and intervene in the internal affairs, because then there will be allegations that we have some special interest in that country. So, for example, what do you do with a situation like Venezuela? I mean, if you look at the crisis in Venezuela, does somebody intervene? By intervening, what do you get? You are only going to make the country worse. The best example is Libya. I mean, those who said we should intervene in Libya, yes, they went in. They took out Muammar Gaddafi. But after taking out Muammar Gaddafi, what happened? Gaddafi died. But for the last 10 plus years, Libya has become a failed state. So we believe that while sovereignty should not give a kind of a free pass to world leaders to butcher their people, at the same time, we are against this notion of intervening on any pretext, because you run the risk of making that country into a failed state. And there are enough examples in the world, from Afghanistan to Iraq to Syria to Libya, and including Yemen, where interventions have suffered.
Now we have a second question.
Yeah, I'm reading it out. Okay.
Now we have a second question.
Can the nuclear issue in India be a negotiating factor with the great Western powers? Yeah, I mean, look, this is a good question asked, because maybe this point I did not convey. Now, let me tell you this. The global order witnessed what is called as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in the late 1960s. What did the NPT do, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? It was the most discriminatory treaty on the face of the earth, because it created two kinds of entities. One, nuclear, those who have nuclear weapons, we call nuclear haves, and those who don't have nuclear weapons were called nuclear have-nots. So creating this world of nuclear haves and nuclear have-nots has not made the world more peaceful. On the contrary, it has allowed countries like North Korea, countries like Iran, even for that matter, countries like Pakistan, to engage in all kinds of dirty activities, illegal activities, to undermine the nuclear issue. What India said was, we will not sign any such, unequal treaty, but we want to work for nuclear disarmament. In the year 1988, the then Prime Minister of India, Rajiv Gandhi, he went to the United Nations General Assembly and he placed on the table of the UN General Assembly a disarmament plan. That means India told the world, you really want to make the world peaceful from nuclear weapons? There is a very simple solution. The United States and Russia, that time USSR, they both have a lot of nuclear weapons. You must give up these nuclear weapons first, and that will help us create a more peaceful world, rather than asking India to commit to a situation where we very well knew that China has nuclear weapons and China remains our adversary. So the nuclear issue is an issue on which we remain committed. In fact, the international community has accepted that despite of not being a signatory to the NPT, India has never given any weapons or weapons materials or weapons grade technology to any country of the world. We were like a student who was punished, but still the student followed the rules of the school. He came on time, he stood where he had to stand, and he sacrificed, he took the pain, but he was a good student. So India has remained committed to every regulation of the nuclear issue, whether it's the missile technology control regime, whether it's the fissile material cutoff treaty. We have adhered to every obligation, and that is why the international community, recognizing this issue, in the year 2006, they came forward and did a civil nuclear agreement with India, which has opened up the scope for India to do civilian nuclear energy, not weapons grade technology, but civilian nuclear energy can be developed with the cooperation of the world. So I would say the nuclear issue is one which proves to the whole world that India, even when it takes unpopular, it was not very popular decision at that time when we took it, but when we took the decision, it was taken purely by keeping in mind the interests of the majority of the world, and in keeping in mind the principle of fairness, equitability, and objectivity in international relations. Okay. Okay. This is another interesting question. Yes. Look, India is a democracy. So you go to elections every 5 years. I mean, Brazil is also a democracy. You know what democracy does. In fact, there is now this discussion going on in the world, who are better in terms of performance, democracies or non-democracies? Because many people look in the world and say, oh, look at China, look how China is growing, there is so much stability. It's not, I mean, it's not perfectly true. There are problems in China as well, but they look at countries like Brazil, they look at United States, they look at other countries and they say, oh, look, you are struggling. So I would not say that India does not have challenges. India has multiple challenges. So let me mention 4 or 5 major challenges. The biggest, challenge for India in terms of its economy is going to be how to raise the per capita income of Indians. Now, let me just mention this. India is an economy of $4 trillion. But India's per capita income, that means the income of every individual, the average income, is only 2,200 US dollars annually. You compare this with China. China is $20 trillion, 5 times India's size economically. China's per capita income is almost 11,000 US dollars, again, 5 times India. You look at United States, it is $24 trillion economy, but per capita income is about 60,000 US dollars. So India, its biggest challenge is to remove the poverty in India, because people still have a very small income and that income has to go up. So that is why India's biggest economic challenge is not just to grow, but the growth has to be inclusive. The growth has to be broad-based. The growth has to be across India. And that is why the government of today, which has been in power now for 9.5 years, they have been doing a lot of work to remove the income gap, to try to reduce the income inequality, and to make things more inclusive and more broad-based. This is on the economic side. On the security side, I will come to politics last. On the security side, the biggest challenge for India is, of course, the two adversaries, Pakistan and China, because Pakistan has this issue with India going back to the independence. And Pakistan was created on this whole notion that they are a country for Muslims, and they just don't accept India and India's rise. So they remain a constant problem for India, and it is something which will probably never end because Pakistan just can't tolerate India and India's rise. But China is a very complicated issue because China and India are two large countries. They are two civilizations. They are people with a lot of ancient history, public consciousness. But the problem is in China, like unlike in India, where we are a free country, I can sit here, I can talk to you, I can criticize the Prime Minister of India if I want to here. I will not be arrested the moment this lecture is over. But in China, the Chinese people cannot tell you the real feelings that they have for their president because they know of the consequences. So it's a communist system versus us. So obviously we are living in a very different world. We face a very serious challenge from China because China would not like to see India rise to China's level. And everybody in the world says India will rise to China's level, but not immediately, in maybe 3-4 decades time. It is clear that China will be in first position, India will be in second position. So China prefers to keep India down, and so they use various ways, military, economic, in terms of politics, etc., to run India down. Now, coming to India's domestic political challenge, the biggest political challenge for India is India's ethnic diversity. I mean, it's a great strength for India. India is very proud of its diversity. Like if you see India, we are a very unique country. We are the country with the third largest Muslim population in the world, even though we are not a Muslim country. In fact, 80% of India's people are Hindus. Okay, so we belong to a religion of Hinduism. And yet, even though 80% people are Hindus, we have 200 million Muslims in our country. The largest is Indonesia, second largest is Pakistan, third largest is India. So we have Christians, we have Buddhists, we have Jain people, and we have even people from Iran who are called the Parsis, and we also have Jewish people. So we have a lot of communities, and that is why keeping these communities together to ensure that they don't fight, there are no communal riots, that is going to be the government's biggest political challenge. The last point about this, India's democracy is 76 years old, but as they say, you are never old enough in democracy. You are always young. You are always learning. I mean, Brazil is also a very young democracy. I mean, you are learning so many things in the last 30 years. And every time you go through a challenge, you come out better. And so we believe that even though we are 76 years old as a country, as a free country, not as a country, as a free country, we still have a long way to go to continue to mature our democracy. Our democracy has also gone through many troubles, many issues. But the good thing is the people of India are committed to democracy. So if any government, any prime minister tries to reduce the democratic rights of people, they will rise up and they will stand up against that leader. So that is the commitment that India has to its democratic character. Okay, next question. I would like to understand a little better about your view about India and Latin America. Okay, right. Now, I'll tell you this point. I do a lot of work in India, Latin America. I also, consult with the government. I advise the government also. Now, India Latin America relations have not been up to the mark for a long time. And that is because we never understood each other properly. Even now, I do understand when I visit countries in Latin America, I mean, beyond Brazil as well, the level of understanding about modern India is very low. Many people think of India either as just a country of religion and spiritualism, as if nothing else happens, or people think that India is just poor and backward and primitive, etc. So there is a need to improve the understanding on the Latin American side about India. Also on the Indian side, there needs to be more understanding about Latin America. I mean, we know Brazil because we deal with Brazil. We deal with Argentina. We deal with Mexico. But there are so many countries in Latin America which Indians only they know once in 4 years when they play football World Cup. Otherwise, Indians don't even seem to know where exactly they are on the map. So we need to improve our understanding at the people to people level so that our cooperation can grow. That's number one. Number two, Latin America is a commodity superpower. In fact, the latest, if you read the Economist magazine, the Economist magazine latest issue has got an article on how Latin America as a region is becoming a commodity superpower. I mean, you have got agricultural commodities, you have got oil, you have got lithium, you have got copper. I mean, I'm talking of the region. So you have got gold, you have got silver, you have got bauxite, you've got water, you've got the Amazon. So you have got the best of everything that God has to offer. So Latin America is so well placed to be a much different place than what it is right now. Where can India collaborate with Latin American countries? Well, when India comes in, India has the big market. The main thing is India has a big market. So for Latin American businesses, Latin American companies, India becomes a natural player because you can come into this big market. 350 million people of India are the middle class. That is the population of the United States, 350 million. That's India's middle class. So any company from Brazil, from Argentina, from Mexico, Colombia, other places, they will find a great market in India. Second, you can use Indian technologies to do value addition for your raw materials. Like, for example, India has offered Bolivia, and we have told Bolivia, look, you have lithium. We will not take the lithium like how China does. China has taken huge contracts in Bolivia on lithium. They will extract the lithium, they will take it back to China, they will make lithium batteries. We have told Bolivia, when our president went to meet the then president Evo Morales that time, we told Morales that, look, we will work with you, our companies will come to Bolivia, we will set up our companies here with your companies, we will do joint venture, we will invest in Bolivia, we will create the batteries here, we will export to third countries. Now, what is the benefit of that? You will get money, you will get revenue, your people will get jobs, Latin Americans will get skills, Latin Americans will also be able to understand that we are making money out of this. It should not be like the colonization of the past, where new countries come, they take away the resources of Latin America and they go away. Like the Europeans did in the past, China should not become the new colonizer. So India has made this pitch that we want to work with Latin America. There are some 2-3 areas where India and Latin America can work together. One, food security. You have got a lot of grasslands, very small populations. You have got very, very good nature and very good climate conditions to create food processing institutions. India is a country, big country, but with a very big population. Our population density is very high. So what happens is we have food issues of food security from time to time. So our companies can invest in terms of food security in Argentina, in Brazil, etc. We are offering right now 2 very important commodities to Latin America, and that is part of our collaboration. One is we are offering software solutions and IT. You go to Mexico, there are almost 1,000 Indian units of IT that operate from places like Guadalajara and Mexico City, these kind of places. It is now expanding to other countries as well in Central America, also in South America, including in Brazil. Our banks are offering banking solutions to many countries in Latin America. At the same time, our pharmaceutical companies, I will give you an example. When President Lula became president back in 2002, one of the first things he did was he said, I will stop these American companies from taking away big money from Brazilians for these antiretroviral drugs, which is the anti-HIV drugs. And he asked his advisors, where can we get these drugs from? They said one of the options is India. India is a huge pharma country we can bring. He came to India in 2003 as the Republic Day chief guest. He met Prime Minister Vajpayee. He signed the agreement. India began to supply drugs to Brazil. And today we have many Indian companies which are situated not only in Brazil, but in different parts of Latin America. So there are various ways by which India and Latin America can collaborate. But the most important thing would be we must work together at the people to people level to improve the genuine understanding about India. And I would say a lecture like this gives you a real picture as to what is India. And I think there should be such, more such, thinking and knowledge about India. Yeah, there's another question about how India plans to fight climate change. Yeah. Now, look, there are various ways you can do this. One of is you can just talk and talk and talk and do nothing. Now, India has made it very clear that it has a major challenge on its hands. What is India's challenge? India does believe that climate is a big issue. It is a big danger to economy, to society, and the country's security. But India also knows that they are a country which is rising. They still have a lot of poor people in India who need jobs, who need economic security. Now, if you tell a company, oh no, you cannot put your industry, why? Because you are releasing too much carbon footprint. You become carbon efficient. What will happen is millions and millions of people will lose jobs. And if they lose jobs, where will they get the money from? So India is trying to strike a balance between economic reality and the climate reality, which is what most developing countries have to do. But I would say, and you can read this for yourself as well, India has done a number of very commendable things. Like we are focusing on solar energy, because in most of India, for about 9 to 10 months in the year, we get very, very strong sunlight. And this sunlight is extremely beneficial for us. So you will see that in India, there is a revolution going on in terms of solar energy. People are being encouraged at houses, in companies, industries, at airports. They are using rooftop solar panels. So they are using solar power in a very big way. And India plans to have 100 gigawatts of solar power in the not too distant future. India also is working on trying to improve other forms of energy efficiency, which is basically focusing on hydropower through Nepal, through Bhutan, and many of these countries, using the tremendous waters we have. India has 111 rivers. That's a lot of rivers within one country. But it is very important to use these rivers to create the hydropower that is necessary, again, because hydropower is cheaper. India is also working on various other forms, for example, nuclear power. India is also looking at nuclear power because nuclear power may be initially costly, but over time, it turns out to be commercially viable over time. So this is one part of it. But India is also, working on various issues of what is called as climate resilience. So Prime Minister Modi has kept a dream for India. India became independent in 1947. So in 2047, India will complete 100 years. And the dream that this Prime Minister has set for India is that in the next 25 years, India must plan for not just energy security, but energy independence. Now, what is energy independence? Energy independence means where India will be able to produce its own domestic source of energy necessary for itself. And two, this particular source of energy will be efficient. So energy efficiency is very important. So India is trying to fight this issue of climate through multiple ways. But India has made it very clear to the world. I'll give an example. One of the ways to fight climate change in India is to focus on what is called as clean coal. Now, we use a lot of coal power in our plants, like China does. We have a lot of coal in India. But because we have not used that coal, we have been importing coal from various parts of the world. Now, this is all dirty coal, and this creates a lot of carbon emissions. There is technology in the world that says clean coal. You can clean the coal. Now, Canada has got this technology. Australia has got this technology. Some other countries have technology. But because this technology is so precious, these countries don't want to give it away. Now, India has made it very clear in the world that if you want to fight climate change, you have to stop behaving like this. we will have to sit together and find a way by which these technologies can be transferred by these richer countries to countries, developing countries like India, so we can focus on cleaning the coal. So if tomorrow we are able to clean up the coal, we are able to use coal resources, but the level of carbon emissions will be much more diminished. So India's focus is on the politics, the diplomacy, to take actions at home, but also to understand that they have to move to more efficient ways of energy management and not be inefficient in their usage. Okay, there is one more question. How are the neighboring countries, specifically China and Pakistan, reacting with the rise of India? Yeah. So as I said in the previous, couple of questions ago, Pakistan finds it very difficult to, in a sense, come to terms with the rising India. I mean, I'm not happy about it because as a neighboring country, in fact, we share a lot of, history, culture with Pakistan. Okay, we speak almost the same language, we eat the same food. So I am not happy to see Pakistan go down the tube. Right now, Pakistan is going through an absolutely horrible situation. They are a nuclear power. Everybody is worried about them because they're a nuclear power. They're an Islamic state. They're not a democracy because the governments are very weak. The military runs them. So there is all, and now they're economically bankrupt. So everyone's worried what will happen to Pakistan. If Pakistan splits up into multiple countries or goes into civil war, it will be probably the worst solution for India, because India will have to deal with this kind of a crisis on its doorstep, and it will hurt India's economy. But Pakistan, unfortunately, cannot come to terms with cooperating with India because the problem is not the Pakistani people. The problem is the institution of the military in Pakistan. The institution of the military in Pakistan, they believe that their existence in Pakistan is only until they are anti-India. The day they become pro-India, the relevance of the military will go and Pakistan will become a democracy. So it is the military which is dictating terms within Pakistan, and that is why we have this situation with Pakistan. So this is about Pakistan. Now talking about China, as I said, China does not believe that India is on the same level as them. I'm telling you this because I have gone to China very regularly, at least made 25 trips to China as a professor. I have gone and talked at many universities. And I have many Chinese friends also, even now. When I talk to them, you can see that they say, oh, we are a global power. India is a small power. India is a regional power. So they don't treat India on the same par as China. But China is very uneasy about India's rise because they know, as I mentioned in my lecture, India is liked by every major power in the world. You ask Macron, and Macron says, I like to work with India. You ask, the British Prime Minister, he says, I work with India. You ask the German Chancellor, same answer. Japan, South Korea, Russia, United States, Canada, smaller countries, regional powers, Brazil. So India's acceptability means that China does feel concerned about India's rise. But are they going to allow India to rise? No. Which is why they keep doing various territorial issues like taking away territory, doing aggressions in the night. Their naval movement around India is also, extremely dicey. So they keep India on its guard because they believe that India's economy must be kept down. Because if India grows, it becomes an alternative to China. Because remember, China is a non-democracy. India is a democracy. So if India rises to China's level, the people in China will get another model. The people in China will say, oh, which means you can become China even through a democracy. So they would not like to see India rise to that level because it will then mean a kind of an indictment of the communist system in China.
Okay, we don't have more questions. I want to thank you for your presence here. We know a lot about everything. We learned a lot about India. And, India will grow a lot in the next years, and it's a very important country in the world. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Dattesh.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Okay.
Thank you, teacher, very much.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye.